Hi everyone, this is Jeff Hopperly from the Calling and Career Office at Taylor University, and this is the first video in a series of videos that we're going to be providing as resources to our students as they think about work and this idea of pursuing a faithful response to God's call in their life. Many of the videos will be far more practical in nature, but today we're going to think more philosophically about what do we mean when we say calling. And that was an important question for me when I was in college. I switched majors 3 times in college. It took me 5 years to finish my degree because I was stuck. I was stuck thinking that there was this calling that existed in the future that I needed to find. Today, I want to nuance this a little bit and think about the difference between our pursuits. What's the difference between pursuing the calling and the caller? And there's a couple of different ways to think about this. Well, first and foremost, when we think about it as the calling, if we're pursuing the calling, it's really easy for us to get caught up in something that's in the future. It's always in the future, well, at least until we find it. But until we get there, we're just sort of roaming through the night looking for it. When we think about work as the calling, also it can feel like a divine appointment. I feel like something that God uniquely created for us to do. And yet, what if we fail? What if it doesn't go well? Does that mean we failed with God? And what about the meaning and purpose that we're looking for in our work? Shouldn't that be there if it is the calling? What if that's not? What if it's absent? Well, if we think differently about it, we can pursue the caller. And when our focus is on pursuing the caller, it changes our time frame. So instead of always thinking about this calling that exists in the future, it helps us to remember that right here in the present, in this place and time, we are already responding to God's call in our life. So work is a part of that, but it's just one part. It's one part in which we collaborate with God. And so if things go wrong in work, there's still so much more to our lives and how we're responding to God's call. And then ultimately that the value of our work isn't all about the meaning and purpose that we find in the daily work that we do, but how it's shaping us, how it's forming our character. These 2 images have been really helpful to me as I've thought about calling. The one on the left is a treasure map. It's this idea that the calling is this treasure that exists, and if I follow all of the right steps and don't get off the path, I'm going to find it eventually. And yet, what if I do make a mistake? What if I pick the wrong major? What if I choose the wrong internship and all of a sudden I'm off of this path? That can be a really disorienting way to go about the pursuit of work. Instead, I want to encourage us to think about pursuing the caller more like a cycle, something that we repeat, something that we test. So with the information that we have about God and the information we have about ourselves, we discern in each moment what's the next right step. And as we think about work, it's helpful for us to think back, when was work first even mentioned? And we go all the way back to the beginning of the story in Genesis chapter 2. And this is before the forbidden fruit, before sin entered the world. God introduces this idea of work, where he has Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And I think this is really important for a number of reasons. First and foremost, work is a good idea. It's not a punishment. It's not a necessary evil as a result of the fall. It was something that God designed for humans. And I think specifically designed it as a way of collaborating with him, sharing in his work, his creative, redemptive work that he's doing in the world. Instead of thinking about work as this necessary evil, we have this opportunity to consider work as something that God always intended for us. And what can we learn about that first job description that God gave to Adam and Eve? Well, it was in the garden. It was working the land. What's more cyclical than working the land and working in a garden? It's this idea of sowing the seed, cultivating the ground, reaping a harvest, and resting. And then we do it again. We sow, we cultivate, we reap and rest, and then we do it again. Each time we do it, we learn a little bit more about God. We learn a little bit more about the work of our hands and our capability to do it. And we use that information to change how we go about our work. And if we're always thinking about work as this thing that exists in the future, this calling that exists in the future, we miss out on this collaborative opportunity to join God in his creative work. And when we think about work in this way, when we're pursuing the caller, we can embrace this idea that the value of our work isn't in what we're making. It's what it's making of us. It's how it's shaping and forming us. and drawing us closer to the heart of God.